Okay, everyone, thank you again for joining us here for the Future of Compute, featuring Cisco's UCSX hardware platform and also our Intersight Dashboard for management. If you note in the chat window, we do have a couple of things that we want to make sure that one moment. And I'm sorry, not in the chat window, in the main window, excuse me. We wanted to bring your attention here to our new UCSX Intersight deployment workshop. It's a 8-hour workshop. It can also be customized, but this is for our standard delivery for UCSX with Intersight and the deployment. We have two weeks running right now, guaranteed to run March 22nd and 23rd, and May 25th and 26th. If you use promo code UCSX20, you'll get 20% off on that course. Also, we have our next on demand. This is an absolutely fantastic product here, folks. Right now, what we're doing is we're slashing the price down to $9.95 with the code NEXT1K. So what is it? It's almost 3,000 videos of course recordings that we've done. We also have tech talks. So the tech talks that we're doing right now are also recorded and you have access to them. We've got a discussion board and we've also got short studies, which are pretty neat. You know, if you want to gauge your knowledge, you can take some quizzes, look at articles, vlogs, blogs, and you know, just kind of help you move through your educational journey. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in here real quick. And the first thing I want to do is I want to discuss what we're going to be going over here. And sorry, I was doing a little work here earlier. There we go. So I just really quick want to get into what UCS is and UCSX, and then what this Tech Talk webinar is really focused on. So the first thing that I want to discuss is what is unified computing, right? And some of you probably already know this, but unified computing, let's go back 20 years real quick. I used to have to go buy this case, right? And then I'd have to install this motherboard. The processor would have to be installed, memory, a hard drive, of course, and some network ports, right? Here's the thing though, we install all of this, right? And what happens is the network and operating systems identify this device with what we call identities. Some of them, excuse me, you're probably already familiar with, such as, let me change that. You're probably familiar with a MAC address, right? Absolutely. The network, the Ethernet network, identifies this server. It identifies it as a MAC address. So we'll just put 1111 there and we'll plug it into a switch. So this switch down here, it identifies that device on that port as 1111 in the form of a MAC address. What about over here? Let's say we have fiber channel for storage. So we're going to plug this into a SAN switch, and you know, we're just going to say this is a LAN switch here real quick. And that's going to plug into some sort of storage array. Now, here's the thing. How does the SAN identify the server? Not with a MAC address, but with a worldwide, and I'm just going to put XN here. It's worldwide node name and worldwide port name. Now, what about, and you know what, we're just going to put this as 1111 because they can. So we've got a MAC, we've got worldwide node name, worldwide port names. And then what about the operating system? When you install an operating system over here, what the operating system does is it identifies that board with what we call a UUID, a universally unique identifier. And this essentially tells the operating system, this is where you live. This is your UUID. This is how it identifies its home, right? So if we go back in the past, that's why you couldn't move this hard drive anywhere else, because it identified the UUID as its home. If it finds anything other than that during the boot process, it says failure to boot. What about down here? Okay, we've got a network card. it goes bad and we have to replace it. Wouldn't that bring in a brand new identity? Absolutely it would. The problem is we usually have this thing called port security on there for security purposes, and it locks down the MAC address, right, directly to that port. So if that MAC address ever changes, it actually shuts down the port. Oh, I can tell you from experience, you know, when you forget that you turned on port security 6 months ago and you're wondering why the server isn't coming online, there's your sign. So it creates an issue for us, right? And then what about our SAN? Same thing. If I need to replace this fiber channel card, what's going to end up happening is a lot of the time what we do is we map our UUID, or I'm sorry, our worldwide no name, worldwide port name to a storage array. So if this changes, that means that this server can't use that storage location anymore because it's specifically mapped to it. This is a major problem. So here's what we did. We said, you know what if I can take these physical identities over here, the UUID, the MAC, the worldwide name, worldwide port name, and make them a logical construct or a virtual identity. So we call this a service profile. That service profile is what allows us to create a UUID, a MAC, and a worldwide node name port name, right? So it allows us to virtualize those identities. And how are we going to use it? We're going to put it on the good old Cisco UCS system. So let me go ahead and draw out 8 servers here real quick. They don't got to be perfect. But what the unified compute system allows us to do is it has this really neat thing on all 8 of these servers. It's called a SIMC, a Cisco Integrated Management Controller. Now, what that allows us to do is take this service profile and send it over to the SIMC. The Cisco Integrated Management Controller will then configure those identities on that compute blade. Now, that in itself is pretty neat. But now let's start talking about hardware failure, just like we had 20 years ago over here. If this hardware fails, guess what? All we've got to do is remap it to the SIMC of another device, a whole nother compute node, and there we go. Now it has the same UUID, MAC, worldwide node name, worldwide port name as before. Why is this so important? Because now that new server looks like the old one and can still access the network, storage, and operating system without us having to do anything. And that's the point that we're at today. The new UCSX system is leveraging a different type of management. And so let me get into that. Traditionally, what you were doing was you were utilizing these things called fabric interconnects. What they allow you to do is connect to the LAN and the SAN. So the servers, they're going to connect down here to the fabric interconnects, and they're going to use that connectivity over there to talk over to the LAN and SAN. So again, if the server needs to talk to the LAN, it's probably going to go over here and then loop on over to the LAN, to a LAN switch. Now, traditionally, right here on those fabric interconnects is what we would use the UCS manager. Now, the UCS manager is an XML application that allows you to take inventory of all the devices and then also create, modify, and apply identities. So in other words, create service profiles and associate UUIDs, worldwide no name, worldwide port name, and MAC addresses, right? But here's another thing that it does. With that, wouldn't we always, whenever we spin up a new server, wouldn't we always want to update the firmware on the board? Wouldn't we want to maybe change the boot order? Would we want to update the BIOS to have virtualization technology turned on so that we could do things like install virtualized components? Absolutely. So the service profile also allows us to create host firmware packages, boot order, and BIOS configuration, and so much more. I don't have enough time to talk about it, but oh yeah, lots and lots of stuff. Now with the new UCSX system, what we're doing is we're doing away with a lot of this. So I'm actually just going to delete this. And now we have our UCSX server down here and our Fabric interconnects. Okay. Again, traditionally the management was done here on the Fabric interconnects. So you'd connect to the you would connect to the FIs, and then you would create all your components and apply them to the servers. The thing is, what's changed is right now these Fabric interconnects are getting absolutely hammered with all that XML data that it's got to keep track of. Oh, and by the way, when you do updates to the system, those infrastructure bundles or those files, they got to live on the Fabric interconnects. This is not advantageous. Eventually, we're going to run out of space on those Fabric interconnects, which means no routing, no switching, right? So what we wanted to do was we wanted to move, I'll take, we'll just say here, management. We wanted to move management off of those Fabric interconnects. And where did we move it? We moved it into the cloud, of course, into our new Intersight dashboard. So what we're doing is essentially just creating API connections from the cloud down to those FIs. And we're doing the same stuff, folks. We're still creating service profiles. We're still creating, I swear that's a B, hold on. So we're still creating boot policies, BIOS policies, all of this stuff, firmware updates, all of this stuff is still being managed, but just through a different management plane, the Intersight dashboard. And so there's three major things from this point. Once you have your system rack stacked and powered, there's a couple of things that we've got to talk about with using this new Intersight dashboard. What are the things that need to be done to be able to get this system online? The first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to claim a domain. What I mean by that is I need to be able to communicate with these two APIs, or what we commonly refer to as a UCS or UCSX domain. So I'm claiming them so that I can manage them. The next step is to start managing them. And step number 2 is a domain profile. This domain profile is everything that you would need to configure on these Fabric interconnects to get them to the LAN and to the SAN. Absolutely phenomenal, brand new construct and concept from the UCS perspective. So I can't wait to show you that. Now, once you configure your domain profile, you're going to start seeing all of this information flowing into your dashboard. So you're going to see the chassis being discovered. You're going to see this server being discovered. You're going to be seeing all of its internal components being discovered. At that point, I've now got a server. I can see that server. It's time to now start applying all that stuff we used to on that server in the form of a server profile. By the way, anybody who's probably worked with UCS in the past, it used to be called a service profile. It's now, yeah, we call it a server profile. I know it's a little thing, but still pretty important. So what I want to do is, again, at this point, we've got all of our servers installed in our chassis. It's powered up. We've got our Fabric interconnects. They are connected. They can see the internet. And so the next thing we have to do is we have to get into our dashboard and claim this domain. So first thing you're going to do is go to intersight.com. Very, very simple, intersight.com. And what you can do is you can either sign up for a Cisco ID, or you can use your existing CCO. By the way, we also do support single sign-on. And another thing that I do want to mention is that we do have on-site, on-prem Intersight management available in the form of a connected virtual appliance or a private virtual appliance, CVA, PVA. They essentially do the same thing as the Intersight dashboard. They're just on-site. So with that being said, those two also support LDAP authentication. So let me go ahead and sign in here. Make sure I'm in the right one here. Nope. I have a couple of a couple of accounts here. So okay. So once you've logged in, by the way, just as a quick heads up, October 17th, this whole interface changed, literally in the middle of my training session. So if you've seen Intersight before, I know this was probably going to look a little different to you, but that's fun. All the same major components are still there in a very similar location. So what I want to first do is I want to start with, instead of infrastructure services, I want to go to your dashboard. Again, this is a really nice tool to be able to show me, for instance, oh, I've got some networking stuff, and yes, you can modify the name here. These are my fabric interconnects. They are showing critical, and here's why. I didn't plug in the second power supply. That's it. But the point is, you see all the green and you see all the red. The green is obviously good, and it's telling us the state of our environment. So we have our cool Cisco servers. If I click on it, it's going to take me into infrastructure services and down to all of my servers. Now, as I mentioned before, you are not going to be seeing those servers until you claim a domain. Now, claiming the domain can, it's pretty fast, pretty quick. The problem is that it takes like 10, 15 minutes for it to discover all of the devices. So I won't be, so to speak, claiming it, but I will show you the procedure of how I claimed it. So I'm going to go here to my main system, drop down here, and I'm going to click on system. And then over here, we have targets. As I mentioned, we need to claim a UCSX domain. That is what we in the dashboard consider a target. By the way, when I click claim new target, you'll see that we have a ton of different targets that you can claim. For instance, you want to see your vCenter implementation? There you go. We can see it in there. Very, very cool stuff. What I'm going to do, though, is I am going to claim an Intersight managed domain. By the way, I haven't talked about UCS Manager in IMM mode or Intersight managed mode, but the Fabric Interconnects will need to be in Intersight managed mode. So we simply select it and click start. Now, I do have to turn on my VPN here real quick. Excuse me. Because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect directly to those Fabric Interconnects. The reason being is because they require, one moment, they require us to talk to the Intersight cloud. The way we're going to do that is create or utilize a, one moment, a pre-shared key here. Okay, here we go. So what I'm doing is I'm using a web browser to go to the IP address of my first Fabric interconnect. I'm gonna go ahead and click advanced, proceed. And if you've had some experience with UCS, you'll probably note that this looks nothing like what you would normally see when you connect it to a UCS manager. That's because, again, this is no longer in UCS managed mode. It's an Intersight managed mode. So this strictly becomes a device console to identify the health of our Fabric interconnects and procure that pre-shared key we're going to use to open up the APIs. So let me go ahead and log in here really quick. And what you'll notice is right off the bat, you actually see both of them, primary and secondary. That's because they're in an IMM, or I guess we would say a UCS domain. They're working together. Now, what we're going to need to do is go here to device connector, and simply over here, once it loads, eventually, we're going to grab the domain ID and the claim code. Excuse me, device ID and claim code. And it's got a very nifty copy button. So all I'm going to do is click here to copy that. And I'm simply going to paste it right here. There you go. Now, I don't have a claim code because I'm already claimed, but it would be sitting right here and it looks exactly like this. So you just copy and paste. So once you click apply, you'll now see your UCS domain. Now, just real quick, if you click on the UCS domain, you're going to see the two fabric interconnects and all the devices connected to it. So you'll see your FIs down here. We'll see the external address that they're coming from, their NAT IP, their public side, their internal addresses, and then there's the target IDs. These are the device IDs. And as you can see, there's two, one for each of the fabric interconnects. And you can also see when it was claimed. Wow. Oh, really? Who did that? Okay. But with that being said, again, it does show you all of your information. So you can see that I have my 6 210C blade servers. And then I also have my input-output modules. If you're familiar with that, that's what connects the networking in the back of the server to the fabric interconnect so we can get to the LAN and SAN. So with that being said, we now, if I went back here to infrastructure services, we would see the two fabric interconnects here. So if we go to FIs, and yes, I forgot to plug in the other power supply. So no big deal. But again, you're going to see those two fabric interconnects. Now, at this point, we have not configured anything as of yet, right? So what you're going to need to do is configure the fabric interconnects so that they start learning the chassis and the servers. Now, again, please keep in mind that mine are already claimed, so they've already been discovered. But if you're in your dashboard right now and you've claimed a domain, you will not see any devices. So what we're going to have to do is, again, we're going to have to configure those fabric interconnects. Cannot wait to show you this, folks. If we click on profiles and we click on UCS domain profile, we just claimed the UCS domain, right? Let's create a configuration for the domain. That is in the form of a UCS domain profile. When we go to create a new one, we're going to go ahead and, one moment, I do need to disconnect this. Okay. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and give it a name. So we'll call this Tech Talk domain profile. And we're going to click next. Now, inside here, the first step is you can assign this now. You can assign this to, oh, I hate when that happens. Get back there. And you know what's nice is, see, it already saved it. So all I got to do is go in here and say edit, and it takes me right back. I love this dashboard. But I could say, yeah, let's assign it here, but I already have a domain profile associated. So what I'll do is I'll just say, I'll assign it later. Under normal circumstances, yes, you're going to want to apply that now or assign now. Then we're going to go ahead and click next. Now, these are all of the constructs that are required to configure your fabric interconnects. So the first thing you're going to see is your VLAN and vSAN components. By the way, we do have policies already created here for my infrastructure VLAN. So I've already created those, and I'm not going to go through all of our, every single policy, because we'd be here forever. But this VLAN vSAN configuration is for your networking piece. The next piece is the port configurations. Now, this is very important. This is how we identify server profiles, server ports, and things like Ethernet ports or fiber channel uplink ports, right? So here I've created 4 fiber channel ports. Over here, I've got 4 Ethernet uplinks. And over here, I've got my 6 server ports. These are very, very important because those are the interfaces we discover on. Now, as you'll note, if I scroll down here, that's Fabric Interconnect A. We can also have a separate policy or the same one for Fabric Interconnect B. The only reason why I have a different one is because these fiber channel interfaces are configured differently. So I have to have two separate port policies, but you can use the same one. So we'll select those port policies, and this is what's going to configure the Ethernet, storage, and server links. When we click next, this is all of our management information. So for instance, the time protocol, right? Syslog. Now, network connectivity, by the way, folks, let me go ahead and open that up. The network connectivity policy is something that's new that you probably have not seen. This is for identifying DNS servers. Keep in mind, we're on an online dashboard, so it's incredibly important to maintain our DNS structure. And so we use a network control policy, or I'm sorry, network connectivity policy, and that tells us the fabric interconnects what DNS servers we should be using. We can also fill in things like SNMP and syslog, but keep in mind that the system QoS is mandatory. Switch control policy is what enables and disables CDP and LLDP. Oh, and also end host mode and switching mode. Very, very important. If you've done a deployment, you know that there's a major difference between end host mode and switching mode. And so with that, folks, that's it. I've now configured my domain profile. Next thing I'm going to do here, folks, is I'm simply just going to open these up and verify my configuration. Okay, those interfaces look good. Those interfaces, well, I guess I could add a couple more here, but for the sake of conversation, we'll leave that. Here's my VLAN config, my domain config, and then any errors or warnings that have come up. By the way, little sidestep here. The errors and warnings actually do not show anything there until you try to deploy the domain profile. So if you deployed this domain profile and it was unsuccessful, if you come back here, the last page, it will tell you why. And keep in mind that you do have a events faults area. So you'd see that either in the domain profile specific to it or in the faults, the global fault summary page. With that being said, folks, the only thing we have to do now is we have to click deploy. Now, a couple of notes here. One of the beautiful parts about the UCSX system is, first of all, the only time those fabric interconnects will reboot now at this point is if you change your unified ports. If you're not familiar with that, it just means that you can change certain ports from Ethernet to native fiber channel. The interfaces, you know, they're usually on the left or the right of the device, and it's different per device, but a unified port itself is just something that you can convert from Ethernet to fiber channel back and forth. That's the only time now, folks, that there's an automatic reboot, period, end of statement, right? So I mean domain profiles, and I also mean server profiles, which is really, really cool. So at this point, I'm going to click deploy. Now, when you go back to the main UCS domain profiles page, you should see an OK next to that domain profile that you just created. And then you should also see your fabric interconnects. You can also drill back down later in life by simply clicking on the policy. And this is going to give you the properties. This isn't the wizard where you can configure. This is just simply identifying the properties. So there's our port policies, there's our VLAN and vSANs, and then here's our UCS domain management configuration. Okay, so at this point, at this point, we should now start seeing up here in the requests tab, you should start seeing, I kept this up so you folks could see this. you'll start seeing that it's doing a blade discovery and it's identifying the chassis. And you're going to start noticing that, oh, now we have a chassis showing up. Why? Because those server ports turned on and were connected to the chassis. Now that chassis at this point is now sending all of its discovered information over to the fabric interconnects. So what's inside that chassis? Yeah, you got it. Your servers, right? So here's our servers. Excuse me for a moment. So this whole discovery process takes, I would say 10 to 15 minutes. It just really depends on your internet connection and speed and performance of your fabric interconnects and your internal network, right? So for me, it takes about 15 minutes for everything to fully discover. But at this point, folks, we now have servers. The last thing that we need to do, the only other thing that needs to get done here is I need to get the server up and running with a server profile. And we're going to go over here to profiles again, and we're going to make sure that we're clicked here on UCS server profiles. And we'll go ahead and create a new one. And so here, I'll call it Tech Talk server profile. Okay. Another thing is you want to make sure that it is a FI attached server. If you do not, it will only apply to C220s, M5, M6s, and M7s, which are now hitting the market. But it will not manage or will not be applicable to your X210C. So you got to make sure that you select this UCS server FI attached. Next, again, we're going to want to apply this now, or we can apply it later. Hey, by the way, since we've learned all of these devices, I can just go ahead and actually here, we'll click on server 6. I can assign it right now. So we're going to go click next here. And this is business as usual. If you've done a server profile in the past or a service profile in the past, well, here you go. We can select the UUID pool. You can also throw in BIOS and boot order. Our power capping policy, virtual media. And then this is all of our management information. So just a quick heads up here, folks, if you don't select something for SIMC access, you won't be able to KVM to it or connect to it directly. So you've got to make sure you assign a SIMC access. And then I also do a local user for local user access. The next thing is the storage. This is where we would configure our RAID sets, right? This is your old local disk configuration policy. It is now called a test M.2 policy, or simply just a storage policy. The SD card, this is going to go away here pretty soon. We're no longer supporting SD card options moving forward with the UCSX system. We still do support the management of your traditional 5108 series and your M5, M6 B200s and C220 M5, M6s. So we still do support them. It's just, you know, you can apply those to the legacy devices, but moving forward, yeah, we're not going to be supporting SD cards. Then moving on here, the LAN and SAN connectivity policy. This is where you're going to configure what we call a super policy. There's only two super policies in the Intersight dashboard, the LAN and SAN connectivity policies. What they are, they consist of multiple other policies inside them. So if I go here and I say create a new LAN connectivity policy, go ahead and give it a name. And this is all the stuff that you're used to seeing. IQN for iSCSI, manual or auto VNIC placement. We're going to say auto VNIC placement. And then you create a VNIC. There's your MAC pool, what fabric interconnect you're connected to, is failover enabled. This is your VLANs, your Ethernet network group policy. This is a network control policy. This is for turning on CDP and LLDP. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of there. But the point is that we can apply multiple. Well, I guess the point here really is that I can use the LAN connectivity policy to do everything LAN related, and then everything here SAN related in the SAN connectivity policy. By the way, folks, at that point, you're going to go ahead and click next. This is very, very important. If you ever see this not deployed, all you got to do is click on the menu option to the right of the server and make sure that you click deploy. Down here, we're going to have a summary of all of the policies that we selected and our configurations. By the way, here's our auto VNIC placement. By the way, it is drag and drop. I can't modify it here. It's obviously, right? This is just the summary, but this is, again, one of the few drag and drop options that we have. So when I click deploy here, we're going to go ahead and deploy this to server 6. And you'll also note right here in the requests tab, if I click here to deploy server, what you're seeing are all of the different stages that the server profile is going through. So it's powering on the server. It's waiting for BIOS to complete. It's generated the server's profile. It's just right now it's waiting on BIOS, right? By the way, for anybody who's again been through a deployment before, you may have heard of this thing called the FSM tab, finite state machine tab. That's exactly what this is. It's just a more in-depth version of the FSM. And so, yeah, this could take upwards of 5 to 10 minutes to apply the profile and successfully boot the server. But at this point, we now should have a server profile associated to our server. So if I go over here to servers, what you should be seeing is the server profile attached. And you should also be seeing a green check mark next to it. Another thing that I want to mention is time. You can absolutely click on that server profile and view what was configured in there, just like we saw in the summary. So here's our identifiers, for instance. I just created a basic server profile, so it doesn't have any worldwide node names, worldwide port names, so on and so forth. So it's not going to have any connectivity either. Well, it does have a VNIC apparently, so, but that's it. And so the last thing that you're going to want to do is obviously apply or install an operating system. And here's the catch. There's actually multiple different ways to do this, and there's a couple really cool ways. So let's step back into the past and talk about that real quick. In the past, we would have to generate or we would have to connect to the KVM, the virtual KVM of that server, and then physically map the ISO to that server inside the KVM. Well, let me go ahead and go over here to servers. And the way that you would do that now is you simply click over here and look at this, launch KVM. Now, this usually means that the ISO is local to you and local to the server. So in other words, that ISO has got to be somewhere on the network that that server can access. Here's the neat part, folks. We're no longer constrained by that. We have a couple of other options here. And the first one I want to mention is the launch tunneled KVM. Here's the beauty. I don't have to have a VPN open to the customer site. I don't have to be on site at the customer's location. I can simply create an API session between the Intersight dashboard and the KVM on this server. That is absolutely phenomenal. It's an on-demand fake VPN, I suppose, right? Which is really, really cool. So here you can see, boom, I'm in the KVM. So just like we used to, we might turn on virtual media and go browse for some sort of ISO, right? And that's our traditional way. What I'm really excited to show you is our brand new way. Let me go over here to system here really quick, folks. Over here, you'll note a software repository. This is absolutely phenomenal. If you go over here to OS links, what I have done is I have stood up a server at my company's location. And then I've shared it out with a username and password. You have to have a username and password. And then I've put in this ISO, right? So I've shared this ISO, excuse me, on my internal server. Now, this does have public access. So what this means is now I have a repository, or essentially an ISO library that can follow me wherever I go. Absolutely phenomenal. And here's how you would use this OS image or the software repository for things like installing an operating system, installing a specific firmware, a server configuration utility, or an answer file. Here's how we would do this. And it's so simple, folks. Let me go back to infrastructure services. I'm going to click on servers again and check this out. I'm going to go over here and just simply say install operating system. Now, right now, unfortunately, mine is not available. Let's see, is this one? Yeah, okay. So if I say install operating system, I hope it allows me to go forward. There we go. So what we're going to do now is see how we already have the OS link. There you go. So server 6, its KVM can now connect directly to my ISO that I've stored up at my corporate location from anywhere and be able to download that VMware 7.0 ISO. That is super neat. If I keep moving forward here, it gets better. You can also build out your configuration, kind of like your server configuration utility. So you can also configure an answer file, or you can have it embedded in the ISO. I'm just going to go here and say embedded, just so I can move forward. What about the server configuration utility? This saved my life back in the day, right? Without the server configuration utility, I would spend so much time searching for and downloading tons of firmware and operating system drivers. What this allows me to do is simply map to a server configuration utility that I already have shared on my corporate server. Click next. Next thing you're going to do here is the target. So the installation target is actually, there we go. The installation target is either an M.2 SSD card. And by the way, the X210Cs do support 2 of them as an installation location. This could also be a RAID set running SAS, SATA, or NVMe. If you're not familiar with NVMe, the Intel NVMe VROC capable drives, please give it a Google. It's really, really cool stuff. Long story short, at this point, we're going to select where we want to install it, and then we're going to click next. Excuse me. And so the last thing is to literally drop the hammer and say, all right, this is what we're going to configure. Excuse me. So when we click install, in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, hopefully, it should install ESXi on this server. Please keep in mind that the traditional option of using the KVM is absolutely still there. And with that being said, that concludes my demonstration. If anybody has any questions, please let me know through the chat window. I'll be here if you need me.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.